All right. So
I
how do
guess.
I do this? You just plug in and away we go.
Yep, we're live, or we should be going live now. There will be a chat. There's three chats actually. There's Kick, YouTube, and Twitch. Um, and we don't usually take questions from there, but every once in a while, if there's a good one, especially from someone who's anti-GamerGate, since I have a lot of anti-GamerGate people in my audience. I do try to like give those a little bit more priority, just because they have a different perspective than mine, and so I want to make sure that I'm fair.
Okay, yeah, I think that's worthwhile. I can't see any chats or anything, so I'll just hang out and let you ask the questions.
All right. Well, hey, welcome everyone. I'm
Hey,
interviewing Troy Leavitt. Did I say your name right?
yeah, it's Leavitt. Sometimes people call me Leavitt, which is just fine, but the way it's pronounced here in kind of the desert Southwest where it is popular is Levitt.
Well, thank you, Troy. You're a AAA game developer. You worked on Hogwarts Legacy, Disney Infinity, a bunch of other games. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm retired now, hanging out here in Southern Nevada on a sunny day. It's supposed to be cold, but it's not too cold, so I'm enjoying that we still got some nice fall weather here.
All right. Well, I don't know if you talked about Gamergate much before this, but I discovered you back during Gamergate. You were more of a neutral voice. You made some videos talking about the topic and about issues relating to Gamergate and video game controversies. I thought you provided some pretty insightful commentary, and your video on Gamergate, or one of them, involved you making an analogy that later became extremely popular. I'm not sure who did it first, you or PSA Sitch, but you talked about how, in your view, Gamergate was like a conversation in a cafeteria, and there's a lot of different tables in that cafeteria. Most of the tables are having good faith conversations and trying to improve the gaming industry, but some of the tables, or maybe one of the tables, has some bad actors who are throwing shit at the walls and starting to try to start a food fight, and this this table is what the media talked about and not all of the other tables.
Yeah, that was in my Gamergate video. Just to kind of put the time frame together is so when Gamergate happened, that's usually recognized, or I would say in August of what, 2014, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't make any videos because I was working on Disney Infinity at that time until after they shut down Disney Infinity almost 2 years later in 2016. And so the first videos I was making was, 18, 20 months after all of that had happened and all those articles had happened. So the video that you're talking about, that Gamergate video, is over 2 years after the fact, or real close to 2 years after it had happened. And everything had kind of, I thought, had died down to a low kind of simmering roar of, what happened there. And so I was picking over the situation as a developer, trying to figure out what had happened to our industry. And that's the analogy that I came up with, was that it seemed like to me at the time, the gaming press kind of viewed itself as like the cool kids, that and in a way they really were. At that point in 2014, I felt like the gaming press had a lot of sway, a lot of influence over just how games were being received by the consumers, and they knew they were in that position, and so they could, flex things on how consumers viewed developers, how consumers viewed games. And that is why I think that it became such a hot topic when people started to suspect, collusion and corruption happening there within the gaming press. And so that's to me that's kind of how it all fits together. Is that the gaming press was like in a position of power in 2014, and so they were able to almost broadcast their viewpoint to the rest of the gaming industry without really having to take the responsibility, I guess, of their actions, is what it felt like at the time. Wow, I kind of went off on the side there.
No, no, you're fine.
Yeah.
We can go as deep or as shallow as you want, I tell people. So you're obviously you're retired now, but during this period, you were actually still an active game developer working for AAA studios. What made you want to comment on this relatively controversial topic as someone who was actively working in the industry and might potentially have their career harmed in some ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't say anything while I was employed with Disney, right? I kept quiet, but I did talk to some of my friends, and the other people who were in the industry that I knew at the time. And what really bothered me about what was happening and why I felt like I needed to speak out was it felt to me that the gaming press at the time was shifting from being this enthusiast press that was really about coordination between players and developers, kind of all sharing in the industry. It seemed to be shifting into this ideologically motivated press that was telling people what they needed to think about games and creating these divisions between what I thought was a very necessary and important relationship we needed between developers and players. And so it was like wedging itself in there and saying, developers are bad and players are bad, and gamers don't need to be your audience. And I just felt like it was creating this controversy in an industry that for me up to that point had always felt like it was very friendly and open and welcoming, and we were trying to get everybody in. Of course, I had been working on Disney Infinity, which was a very family oriented game, but I had this very positive upbeat attitude towards games. And then here come all these articles. Bam, gamers are dead, gamers don't need to be your audience. And that struck me as like just so divisive and so unrepresentative of my experience of having made games professionally for 20 years, that I had to speak out. I had to say something about, look, guys, really, games is good, gamers are good. This thing that's happening feels to me like it's coming from the gaming press and not from the gamers or from the developers themselves. It felt like it was an outsider group trying to come in and create controversy. So that's why I had to speak out.
An outsider group? You mean the games journalists or someone else?
Well, it was a combination because I felt like Anita Sarkeesian and the feminist frequency represented an ideological position that then had gotten into the gaming press as this was the unassailable position, right? The feminist frequency position of social justice became the de facto correct position to hold, and so all of the gaming press felt like it was being filtered through that uh, position, and it felt very alienating, isolating, and that was because of those GamerGate articles, right? That's when it became really apparent. Gamers are dead. White male gamers are a problem, and it became all about identity and politics, and not about quality of game or about even development. It just suddenly started to be about what color is your skin and what's your sex, and that seemed so wrong to me about game development.
So did you perceive these people talking about gamers being over and these identity type politics? Did you see that as stifling of your creative freedom as a developer, or
Yes, it wasn't so much stifling as I thought it was malignant. It was maligning an industry that I felt was very open and positive. And I'm gonna, I talked a little bit like when I had those discussions with Liana Kurzner way back when, we both agreed back in the '80s that gaming used to be regarded as kind of a really nerdy thing that kind of neuroatypical kids did, right? It wasn't really well received at first. There was a little bit, but it took a while before people started to see it as a legitimate like hobby and then a legitimate profession, and it kind of grew. And so back in when Gamergate happens, now games have kind of taken over the world. 2014, it's grown up, and it was this. I have a feeling it was a lot like with movies, where you suddenly realize that this industry that you've watched grow from being very small into a more mature thing is now being maligned and attacked as something very negative. And I just had this like, I need to stand up for the gamers. I need to stand up for the game development history that I felt was very positive, very trying to uh, almost and it sounds kind of silly, but almost like save the world, right? I was this very positive, optimistic guy when it came to game development. um, I thought it was a way for people to come together. I thought it was a way for people to enjoy their hobbies, and men, women, everybody. And I just felt like this the gaming press was suddenly wedging itself in there and saying, hey, we have this huge problem with racism and sexism. And at that time, it was mostly sexism that I just didn't see. It felt like it was a manufactured controversy, and it was mostly cover, or it looked like cover to me, for the gaming press's own sins that they were trying to hide. Um, that was how it looked like to me.
what was the response to you making these videos?
It was interesting because when I made that first Anita Sarkeesian video, the one that later picked up like over 400,000 hits. It was just this, my YouTube channel is so tiny. It was just me being this little hobbyist. Most of the response that I got once it hit was very, very positive. There was a lot of people saying, finally, there's a developer who's saying, hey, games are good, gamers are basically good, and this position that's being put forward by Anita Sarkeesian and the gaming press doesn't represent us, and they seemed very supportive of me, which encouraged me to make more videos. Of course, I started making more videos, kind of saying the gamers are good sort of approach. That was my angle on, I think, the whole Gamergate side of things, was that I was pushing back against that identity politics of trying to make um, gaming an identity politics minefield of what your sex mattered or what your race mattered, and it really shouldn't, either in development or in gameplay. It should just be about the games themselves, and that's the ideological position I was in, that kind of that libertarian, everybody's welcome here, everybody please come in, and don't gatekeep anybody from coming in and enjoying our hobby.
Now, obviously, you had a very different perspective on Gamergate than someone like Anita Sarkeesian had. Why do you think that you diverged to such an extent?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when the first articles landed in 2014, I was very sympathetic to, I think, the press narrative when it first hit, because I thought, oh, they're talking about a certain subset of gamers that are really bad and mean and malicious towards women. And I know that a lot of the other developers I was with also kind of just took the stories at face value. It was only when you started to think about it and say, wait a minute, I don't know any of these people that they say are really misogynist, and I just didn't see evidence of it happening. And everybody that I worked with was very positive and upbeat, and I started to get that suspicious sense of things. So my initial sense was that, hey, there really is a problem here with some gamers attacking some women. And then it started to look more and more like, no, wait, that's kind of a smokescreen. That's kind of a story that's over this larger discussion about corruption and collusion and censorship that's happening in gaming, that the press seems to be like, they don't want to cover that story. They want to cover this small minority story of these jerks who are attacking, um, Zoe Quinn, and trying to make that into some sort of big story, when really I felt like it was more just a scandal. So yeah, sorry if I kind of went sideways there, but yeah, my impression of Gamergate being different than Anita Sarkeesian was that it was mostly about the identity politics, was what most people were talking about. They were talking about the corruption, they were talking about the collusion, they were talking about identity politics. That's what people were talking about on Twitter and on YouTube. But what was showing up in the gaming press was just exclusively about the jerks who were harassing the women or the developers, and that was the entire story, right? And that was just missing what was really going on.
Do you think the games press was onto something when they declared that gamers are over? Because there were some negative aspects of gaming culture, or some groups within gaming culture that were sexist. The 12-year-old kid on Call of Duty who uses the N word, or who makes sexually harassing comments towards a woman in the lobby or whatever.
Yeah, I think that the positive of it was that it raised awareness, right? That I think there were some jerks, but what it did is people very quickly developed tools to deal with it, right? You could block and mute people almost immediately as soon as people started to worry about this, and then there were moderators who showed up. So there were tools that showed up in the game industry immediately as soon as this became a problem. And so to me, it felt like, well, we know how to address this. We know how, from a game consumer standpoint, how to try and get control of this, so they don't need to attack an entire demographic as being problematic. It's more just like, we've got some jerks in the industry. Here's how you deal with them: mute them, or don't play with them, get rid of them. And it doesn't. It's not about ideology so much. It's just about getting rid of people you don't want to play with.
Was there any value in the critiques that Anita Sarkeesian or the games journalists offered in regards to sexism in the games themselves, or like the games themselves promoting sexist attitudes in the world?
Yes, I think, in fact, sometimes I would say in some of my videos that I thought Sarkeesian raised some good points about some of the more challenging elements in some of the M-rated games. Like she did have some valid points, but it was so narrow. It was an ideological pinhole, right? She was looking through a very narrow position and not giving any sort of latitude to other games that weren't doing that. It was like she was on a demon hunt and had to find demons in every game, no matter whether they were actually there or not. And so, if she pointed out some of the problems in a game like Grand Theft Auto 5, that's fine, and I think that's worthwhile, and people should be aware of it. But then when she would go after and say something like, "Well, Mario is sexist, right? Because we're going after Princess Peach, and now Princess Peach is the ball, and this represents the whole patriarchal structure of treating women as a reward or as a ball to be played with rather than as a fully recognized person." And you start to go, okay, now you're really starting to twist things to get into that sort of critique. And it also seems to me that you could just as easily take that critique and say, well, Mario's just a disposable male, and his whole life is wrapped around seeking female approval, and you can just, you can. To me, it lost its value when it became just about opinion and about spinning things to serve an ideological position rather than about like really critiquing what was in the game or what the intent behind the game was or what the developers were trying to do. Instead, it was like, I'm on a hunt to find anything I can find misogynist or racist in any game, and we're going to call it out, and we're going to make it look like the developers did it on purpose and that they have, malign and mean intent. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is not what is going on in development. Development is so much about just trying to get people to enjoy your game and not pushing, at least in my experience, ideological agendas. Like you're just not doing that. You're trying to. It, I guess sometimes games are, but in my experience, man, it's just about help those gamers have a good time. And I was so disappointed in Sarkeesian's attacks on great games that I felt were undeserved.
Have you seen the 2023 Mario movie?
I have not seen it.
Okay, never mind then.
I've heard that it was pretty good though. A lot of people seem to really enjoy it, and it treated the property with such respect that most people said, "Yeah, this is how the property should be treated." And to me, that's the key to success in anything is just treat your property and your fans with respect, and that'll be your guide.
Yeah, I saw it. I thought it was decent. It's a good movie. It's more of a kids movie, but there's also enough in there for adults to have a good time. And I think it was better received than the 1993 movie.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of strange. Yeah, I think I did see that probably in about 1993.
Can you define what GamerGate was?
Um, so on my GamerGate video, I think I defined it as a revolt against identity politics, which is what I felt it primarily was. Um, but it was so much more. To me, it was like the first shot in kind of this culture war that has then continued ever since. GamerGate then got wrapped up in somehow uh, contributing to Trump's election. But it's funny, back when it was going on, it was just about feminism and sexism, and all the racism and alt-right stuff got added over time as they tried to position it as more and more culturally significant. But to me, Gamergate was really just about people, mostly the gamers who had been called out by the gaming press, waking up and saying, "Hey, how come we're being attacked by, the press here, or by this certain group who seem to be elites, and telling us that we're just bad because of our skin color and our race and for the games that we play?" And that seemed like a ridiculous reason to be attacked. And that to me was what Gamergate was really about, was gamers saying, "Hey, we're not bad people. We like playing games. That's it."
Did you consider yourself a supporter of the movement, or were you more neutral?
I felt like I was more neutral because I didn't know what was going on in 2014. When the GamerGate stuff was really happening then, and it wasn't until 2016 when I came back around that I said, "Okay, there's another side of the story here," but it was mostly over, from what I could tell at that point, right? Like that point, the FBI had already, I think, completed their investigation. There had been the women action in the media. had done that research on Twitter to find
Zero
out,
point six six percent.
yeah, a tiny percent had been engaged in some sort of harassment. So it looked to me like it had largely blown over, and it was more just about picking up the pieces.
Okay. Yeah, there were a lot of us who were still involved. I was involved till about 2018, early 2018.
Yeah, I always felt like I was kind of on the periphery because I was in development, but I wanted to say something, and mainly I wanted to tell the gamers who were being attacked, hey, development loves you, right? There are some developers who don't agree with this attack on you and your identity and saying that it's bad that you're bad for liking certain games or that just seems awful to me. It's like telling people who drive or buy cars that oh you're a bad person if you buy a Fiat or something. I just don't get it. I don't understand why you would attack your own consumer base. Yeah, it's crazy to me.
Back to Sarkeesian for a minute. You talked about Mario.
Yeah, yeah.
Her view. I don't want to straw man her, but I don't think I've seen her Mario video actually. But I think I'm roughly aware of the arguments that people like her made. So I could
It's
probably
a
do a good
damsels
job.
in development. Yeah,
That
damsels in development, I think is the name of the video. Yeah.
that Mario is the player character, and Luigi if you're doing two people, and they are trying to rescue the princess who is mostly useless or not able to protect herself very well against Bowser, and the whole point of the game is basically to save her from Bowser. Do you think that that promotes like this negative view that women are helpless?
I don't really think so. Because I believe that a lot of games, and this is just the truth of the matter, a lot of games are looking for an impetus to drive the player to do something. And to rescue a princess is a shallow and simple, easy, off the cuff way to say, here's what you need to do and get going, right? So that's why Mario goes to rescue the princess from Donkey Kong in the Donkey Kong games on the old coin op is just because you needed something to drive you. It was a push. It's poor writing, it's a simple sort of thing, but it's just a trope, right? And so it's okay for Anita to call it out and say, "Hey, look, we're using this trope all the time," but then to make it look like it's some sort of an intentional attack on women, and that like Shigeru Miyamoto is like thinking about how we keep the women down or something that's taking it way too far, and that's kind of what I object to is I'm like it's okay to talk about or to acknowledge that there are some tropes that come out of our society that could be viewed as either patriarchal or even matriarchal in some cases, but then to start to read a lot of intent into those things that people are trying to be deliberately harmful in doing this, then I think that I'm like, no, they're not. It's just kind of a quick and easy way to get things going. Like Ghosts and Ghouls, you had to go rescue a princess. In all the what are the Streets of Rage games, you're always rescuing, and this is pretty common. It's just a trope, but they reverse it too, right? You also see a quick start, same thing. Like what was it, Donkey Kong Jr. Now you have to be the baby and you're rescuing your mama and you're rescuing your mama from Mario. And so just this setup of rescuing somebody is really what I think was there, and it wasn't trying to make any sort of statement about the position of women in society. It was just we need to rescue somebody. This is easy because it's a princess. Does that make sense? You see where I'm kind of going with that? That it was not with intent about anti-feminism. It was like we need a quick way to get the game going.
Yeah. One thing Anita talked about, and that I criticized her for at the time, Oron Darklord and I talked about this. I maybe shot him down a little too hard, but um, because I think it's not a bad argument, but I have to push back critically. Is this idea that video games themselves can have real world negative impacts by reinforcing gender roles and or sexist attitudes in society, and that some people say that this sounds kind of similar to the arguments that people like Jack Thompson made, people who try
Hmm.
to link video games to violence or Dungeons and Dragons to violence or rock music to violence and things like this. Do you think that making those, well, first off, do you think making those claims about the real world link between sexist attitudes and video games, do you think there's anything to that? And two, do you think it's inherently carries with it certain censorious connotations?
Yes. So I don't think there's really much to that, either for violence or for sexism in games. And I remember there was a 2014 study where they looked at it longitudinally across, hundreds of people specifically for sexism in games to see if it created sexist attitudes or increased misogynist attitudes, however they look at that, I guess, on questionnaires. And they didn't see any link, just like they didn't see any link with violence in the past. So it's based around this idea of cultivation theory, that that what people are continually exposed to becomes normalized, and then once it becomes normalized, people start to act out on it. And there may be some truth to that, because we do live in a culture, but it's not direct causation, and it's way too much to take it to the point of, well, we have to go and have some sort of standards to police what people are allowed to put in their games or in their movies. Who makes that decision? And so yeah, so am I getting at the question there?
Yeah, that's part one. And so is making that critique saying, "Hey, look, this video game causes violence, or this video game causes sexism," even if it's like to some extremely minute degree. Do you think that making that argument inherently implies that we shouldn't make games like that?
Um, no, I think that first of all, you'd have to demonstrate that there's harm, and I don't know that you can do it just by saying, just asserting that the harm exists. And secondly, I'm always very cautious about uh, anybody censoring art or literature or video games on the potential that they think it might be harming somebody because of what's included in there. So yeah, I'm very libertarian, very open, free speech, very close to that absolutist position of I don't think you should be censoring anything in video games. Um, that being said, I also think that consumers can readily censor games just by not playing them or not purchasing them, right? If there's no market for these sorts of things, then they'll die. And that's the best way, I think, is let the market determine what should be there and what shouldn't be there, as opposed to some sort of elite group that tries to oversee and censor what's okay in a game and what's not okay in a game.
You kind of referenced this briefly, but some people have said that Gamergate caused Trump to be elected. Do you do you think that they're right about that, or that there's anything to that?
No, I don't think there's anything to that. That feels completely after the fact, right? That's like after Trump got elected, then they started trying to look for some reason, and that's yeah, and there it just wasn't a big enough movement, I think, to to cause that. Uh, and I don't think that Gamergate was all alt-right or even right-leaning for Trump anyway. I think that there were some on the left and some on the right. To me, it's one of those. It feels like a conspiracy theory trying to tie Gamergate to some sort of pipeline to drag people down towards a right-leaning sort of worldview, and then they started voting for Trump or something, or became white supremacists. Maybe there's a small subset of people who trickled down that, but I don't think it was intentional. Although I do think like Breitbart was trying, and Milo Yiannopoulos, I think there was kind of that pull towards the right for a little while, but it didn't doesn't seem to me like Gamergate was really a right wing sort of event, even though a lot in the gaming press tried to make it into something right wing.
So you're a developer and you consider yourself a gamer too, yes?
Yes, yeah, I would say so. Well, gamer is a that's an appellation of self-identification, right? You say, well, I like games, therefore I'm a gamer. Yeah.
Is that all that means to you? Just that you like games?
Yes, it's like a sports fan or something. To me, I think that's all it should mean, right? Like, oh, gaming and in particular video gaming is a big part of my life. Therefore, I'm comfortable calling myself a gamer. And then when they try and push it into being some sort of identity for, a political position, I reject that and I say, no, anybody can be a gamer. Anybody can identify as a gamer, just like anybody can be a sports fan.
If instead of writing the Gamers Are Dead articles, the press had just said, hey, maybe even together, maybe get Totaku, Polygon, GameSpot, whatever, to all come together and do a joint letter saying, hey, look, we think that there's a lot of positive aspects of gaming culture and the gamer identity. There's also some negatives. We can talk about that. We don't support sexism. We don't support harassment, but we do support reforms. We're going to implement these reforms. and we're going to try and do better in the future and build a better industry together that is for everybody. If they did that instead, would you have been open to hearing them out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think um, journalism used to be more like that. It felt to me like this was much more. That's why I go back to that. Cool kids in the cafeteria, like they were pronouncing how things were going to be going forward. Gamers are dead, as though they were the anointed ones, right? They knew what was right for the industry and what needed to happen. Uh, Says who, right? What makes you guys in this position of we know what's right for everybody? And I think that's what a lot of people were also objecting to, is just, they thought they were better than everybody else, and this is how it needs to go down. If they would have come forward and said, gaming is great, but there are some problems, and there are some fringes, and there are some groups that are making it bad for other people. Let's talk about how to make gaming a little better for everybody. um I think it would have been much more received. And I also think if the press would have called themselves out, and you see it now, fortunately, some of the press outlets do it better, some of the side ones. But if they would have said, yeah, we do have some problems with collision and corruption, and sometimes we're a little too close and chummy. We should police ourselves better too. I just felt like it wasn't handled at all like adults would handle a problem they perceived. It was handled like high school kids would handle it.
Is that just because of the cool kids mentality? Because it seems like in the real world, like most companies, well, one, like, it seems like they just care about money, and it seems like the easiest thing in the world is for the CEO or whatever to come out and be like, "Oh yeah, we slapped a couple people on the wrist. Go home, nothing to see here." Like that seems like the normal PR answer you get. So why not just go that route?
So do you mean why not are you
The gaming
advo-
companies, the gaming journalism companies.
oh, the companies themselves? Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around how to address the question
I could
exactly.
reword the question if you'd like.
Okay, yeah,
I don't
let's
think I
let's
worded it. Okay, so why didn't the gaming journalism companies just say, hey, look, we're going to slap a couple people on the wrist, say we're sorry, call it a day, or even just ignore it and it'll blow over in a few days or a week or two or whatever?
Yeah, so are you asking why did the gaming journalism companies?
Yeah, why do you think?
Yeah, I that's a good question. I think there was probably both a sense of ideological capture there, where I think they thought they were probably doing the right thing, but I also think there was a lot of clickbait power at the time, where these were. It seems to me like it was a very hot topic, and a lot of people were paying a lot of attention. I mean, so I was at Disney as Disney started to transform. We were there when Lucasfilm was bought. We were really excited at Avalanche, and so we saw the Kathleen Kennedy thing come in. And I remember being concerned when she started saying things like, this is not your father's Star Wars, or the Force is female. And you could see that there was an agenda lurking even back then in 2015, 2016 at Disney. So I kind of have that same sort of feeling about the same thing around the Gamergate timeframe, that you could see these agendas that were coming, that we needed to change the way that games were working to hit this ideological standard, and it wasn't about necessarily making money. And I kind of think that some of the gaming press, the bigger organizations, were already on board with that ideological stance, like they had been, they had been inculcated into it. A lot of the young journalists coming out of college had already adopted that worldview of oppressor and oppressed, and they were just ready to find it in the games industry and then make it into, the main news story so they could set the world straight.
A lot of outsiders have a hard time wrapping their head around Gamergate, and maybe a lot of people who were involved in the conversations at the time do too, because on the one hand you have like these corrupt games journalists, the other hand you have like the people who are advocating for censorship, or who are, and then on the third hand you have people who are talking about like social justice in their articles or in YouTube videos in gaming. And like this like weird conflagration of these three things that most people would view as like kind of separate. So how did all three of these things merge into one aspect?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think you do hit on a very salient point here, that it was kind of like this coming together of all these different points all at once. And to me, it does feel like it was through that ideological lens of, at least that's how I came to view it as I was making my videos, because I was trying to make sense of what was happening to our games industry as I was making those videos. And you can see, or I can see in hindsight, that I was starting from a, well, that's kind of this neo-feminism, and then it was like, and then I started to see it as a third wave feminism that was coming in, and then I started to see it once the race came into it, right? When Anita Sarkeesian started talking about um, not your exotic fantasy, and started talking about the race problem that apparently gaming suddenly had, and it was just like this weird progressive uh, tide that seemed to be swinging in to criticize everything that was going on in games. So it felt to me like it was already there, and that all of these other kind of elements, the corruption, the collusion, the censorship in particular, were kind of in the wake of that ideological tide. Like the censorship to me felt like it was mostly in line with those ideologies, right? It was usually about, oh, we need to censor things that we find from Japan a little bit too sexy or something, and so that kind of fit in with the neo-feminist kind of agenda. So it felt to me like they were interrelated on ideological grounds. In fact, going back to Anita Sarkeesian, she said in her Mashable interview in 2017 that it was never for her about video games. It was always about social justice. And when she said that, I'm like, oh, everything snaps into place now, right? You really didn't care about games this whole time. You cared about your religious viewpoints on social justice and advocating for those. And to me, Gamergate was kind of like, oh, the video game world started to recognize this push for the what we now recognize as the woke religion, was one of the first battles, or the first places where there was an evangelical movement, was there around Gamergate, and the gaming press was evangelizing the woke religion.
Is there something wrong with someone who's not a gamer coming in and criticizing games?
No, I don't think there's a problem with that at all, except that it's kind of an uninformed position, and I think that people need to call that out. What I objected to about Sarkeesian's position was she kept saying that she cared about games and that she was a lifetime gamer. She kept coming around to like, oh, I just really care about games. It wasn't until she finally came out in that Mashville interview that what people have been saying all along, it's not really about games, right? It's about this social justice agenda. And so she was open with that, and that to me was the issue. Was it was almost like Anita was looking for a social justice cause, and video games happened to fit the bill. And so she came from the outside to come in as an elitist, as somebody who's well educated in her own mind, to tell the rest of the world what's wrong with games and gaming culture and the white men that dominate it. And I think people just were like, no, you can't do that and have people take you seriously. And then they were surprised when most of the press did seem to take Miss Sarkeesian's criticisms very seriously, and she was on ABC News and the Colbert Report and everywhere else, even though she had a hard time naming, more than two or three games.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think about how I'm going to push back on this because I I am consider myself a fan of synthwave music to like some modest degree. Like I have some degree of interest in listening to this kind of music, this sort of like 1980s retro cyberpunky
Yeah,
music.
yeah.
And I don't know hardly anything about the industry whatsoever. I could like name a couple songs that I like. Um, if I were to, and like whatever, you can call me a synthwave fan. Maybe Anita thought of herself in the same way in gaming. I've played a few games before. I had a little bit of a fun time with it, whatever. And now let's say that I decide, you know what, I'm going to go and make a series of videos where I criticize synthwave music. And
Hmm.
maybe I'm not like a real synthwave fan or whatever, but does that mean I don't have the ability to do research, to learn more, and to criticize it, even as someone who is only moderately invested in that culture?
No, I think that you would be that's perfectly fine, to come in. My objections about Sarkeesian's criticisms of gaming wasn't so much that she was an outsider, it was that it was from an ideological standpoint as an outsider. So if you came into the synthwave world, taking your example, and said, I'm going to come in, I don't really know much about synthwave, but I'm going to pick an industry, synthwave, and And now I'm going to take it apart from a standpoint of why it's sexist and racist. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'm going to find it. And that's what I think people uh, picked up on, was it wasn't coming from a position of love. It wasn't coming from a position of I want to improve things necessarily. I mean, maybe there was some of it, but it was primarily motivated by an elitist standpoint of I need to. What does she say? Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you need to point it all out. And that attitude is not a good place to be in, I think, if you want to present well-rounded criticism. I'm not saying she shouldn't have been there at all. I'm just saying it was very narrow. And it was unfortunate that that narrow perspective was taken as the entire perspective, as some sort of robust analysis, when it really was just a very narrow look into a very few subset of games.
Yeah, to clarify though, because I made the same mistake once. Uh, Anita Sarkeesian, when she said that everything is racist, everything is sexist, everything is homophobic, you have to point it all out. She said, in the full context of that, she said, "That's how I used to be." Not that that's her current
Yeah,
view when she said that.
yeah, I remember several people kind of saying, "Hey, when you look at the whole quote," and I went, and I've looked at that quote in context a few times, and I guess it's not really worth arguing too much about the quote, but it seemed to me that she was making the case that that was her enlightened view, that that she had arrived at a point where this is what I realized I needed to do, and then over time, in context, I've realized that I shouldn't do that so much, but I still believe that that's the case, right? That everything's sexist, racist, and homophobic, but that I've learned I have to not call it out so much because it's not it's not as well received. In other words, she was saying that she believed, in my opinion, that she really believed everything's sexist, racist, and homophobic, but that she had learned that calling it all out aggressively was not the best way to get people to engage with her ideas. That's how I thought that quote was intended.
Well, Troy, you obviously are an older gentleman. You've retired. You've lived a long life in the gaming industry. Not in the games
Yes.
journalism side, to be fair, but if you were the editor in chief of one of these gaming sites and one of your employees was credibly accused of ethical violations, what would you have done?
I think we would need to immediately, especially if credibly accused, you got to open an investigation. You got to get in and find out what happened. Um, and then if these credible, accusations turn out to be bad, then yeah, you gotta turn it over to, if it's bad enough, you turn it over to law enforcement or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I see no problem with pursuing credible accusations against people. Right? I think people need to feel safe in their workspaces, and people need to feel safe to make uh, accusations if they, where something bad has happened.
Being on the developer side of things, did you see anything from the development studios or from the publishers that seemed like it was corrupt in the way they dealt with gaming websites?
Uh, so in one of my videos, I talked about a long-standing relationship between developers and the press, where you'd often give press junkets, right? You'd give key journalists special treatment. And I remember back when I worked at that single track that this happened fairly openly, where they would just invite people from the press out to Salt Lake City, Utah, take them up to a ski resort, spend the weekend, and then they would show them the game, right? So this sort of stuff's been going on in the industry for forever, right? But I think it's also something that's worthwhile calling out and saying we should be careful and cautious about getting too chummy. The press used to be an enthusiast press that was, I think, trying to connect gamers or players with their best products, and it's changed over time where it doesn't feel like it's so much about um, being about enthusiastic about the games anymore. Now it's about different, I don't know, different agendas and getting clicks.
Now, obviously, you were a developer for Hogwarts Legacy.
Yes.
That game did receive a little bit of criticism I guess it received a lot of criticism, actually. Let's not kid ourselves. From people who didn't like J.K. Rowling because they thought that she had made some comments they felt were transphobic. I don't even know all the comments that she made. I don't really care that much. I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan. I think the movies are cool, but obviously your game received a lot of criticism. There was people being harassed if they live streamed playing the game. There were groups of people that would harass those people, um, and there was an attempt to boycott the game. How do you feel about all of that?
Oh yeah. Well, you know that the gaming press came after me too, right? That I ended up when I resigned from Avalanche during the development of Hogwarts Legacy. It was while the gaming press had launched those articles calling me out for my old videos about GamerGate and feminist frequency. So yeah, there was. It, I believe that there were folks within the gaming journalist space that wanted to go after J.K. Rowling so much that they were looking for something to stick onto Hogwarts Legacy to make kind of a story. And then, somebody drug up my old videos because they were dead, 3 years ago, and then started writing articles about me to try and get at J.K. Rowling and Hogwarts Legacy via me being some sort of alt-right troll or something, right? That they tried to make it look like I was uh, contributing to a really bad game in Hogwarts Legacy in some way. So my whole opinion on that is it was manufactured controversy. The whole thing about me, about J.K. Rowling, about the game itself, it was controversy that was being manufactured, um, really to try and prove, I think, by the gaming press that they were still in some way relevant, that they could still in some way influence the outcome of a game, of a high profile game like Hogwarts Legacy. And I believe what was really smart about the Hogwarts Legacy marketing team, after they saw how the gaming press had attacked me, I think that they made a cognizant choice to not really interface with the press as much anymore. And instead, they started going directly to the fans. And when they went directly to the fans via their YouTube channel, via their Twitter, being inviting these YouTube um, what do they call that? These YouTube content creators who were covering Hogwarts Legacy, just fans, and invite them out to Avalanche. They created this new hype, this sense of goodwill around the game for players that didn't involve the gaming press at all. And so the gaming press is over there writing these articles about Hogwarts Legacy is bad and you shouldn't play it, and there's it's transphobic, or you're supporting J.K. Rowling, and so all the articles were one way, but the actual fan base was over there very eagerly awaiting the release of the game because they were interfacing directly with the developers at Avalanche and seeing the love for the game and seeing the love for the property. And for them, the J.K. Rowling issue was a non-issue because they didn't care. They just wanted to play the good game. And to me, that was in a way, it almost like proves that Gamergate was right all the way down the line, that at the end of the day, the gaming press doesn't have the influence that they think they do, um, or that they wish they had. That when developers and players interact directly, uh, that's when you get the magic, right? And I think Hogwarts Legacy kind of proves that they pushed the gaming press off to the side, and the game still became, a huge success despite gaming press outlets saying they weren't going to cover it and that it was fundamentally a bad game.
One more question on Hogwarts Legacy, I guess, and that's how do you think about separating the work from the creator of the work? For instance, let's say you're a fan of a musician, and that musician says something that you very strongly disagree with. Maybe you even think is bigoted in some way. Do you think it's reasonable for you to boycott that musician, or should that be a separate? Should you separate the politics from the creator?
Uh, in my case, in my personal opinion, almost always separate by a good long distance, right? Like, I feel that when somebody makes a piece of artwork, like say J.K. Rowling releases into the world the wonderful wizarding world, that it becomes after a while almost part of the culture, right? It becomes part of society. And so in a way she's gifted us with something very rich, and that then the fans and the culture have added to it, and it's become something marvelous. So if she has positions later in life that I completely disagree with, that doesn't mean that I have to throw away everything she ever did with the Wizarding World. That is now ours, right? It's become part of culture, and the best way to I'd say pay respect to that is to treat the property with respect, like I think the Avalanche team did for Hogwarts Legacy. Is, they treated Hogwarts Legacy, they treat it like a love letter to the fans, and completely ignored J.K. Rowling's positions or her politics and everything else, because it just didn't matter. It wasn't about her. It was about the game and the fans. And I think that's the proper way to deal with intellectual property. Is if there's any gatekeeping to be done, it's to respect your intellectual property when you're working on it, so that the fans get what they expect out of the game. And that's a good kind of gatekeeping.
Oh no, you worked for the big bad mouse, so I gotta ask. It's not even really GG related, but it's a pet issue of mine. How do you feel
Yeah.
about things entering the public domain sooner?
That's a good question. I don't know if I feel that well informed to answer. Um, it's weird to think of stuff like, because you're talking about like Mickey Mouse, right? Mickey Mouse entering the public domain,
Yeah,
and then Disney
they
keeps re-upping it. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, well, I think for something like Disney, they kind of have to do that. I don't know. That's a tricky question, and it's interesting that you brought that up, because I met Warren Spector, and he worked on Epic Mickey, right? And Epic Mickey, actually, Avalanche helped out with Epic Mickey. And if you remember, the Epic Mickey game introduced a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, or actually revived a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and that was so that Disney could uh, what's that? Get control of that property again, so that it didn't release into the public eye or whatever. They got it, I think, from Universal back to Disney. So anyway, I'm just kind of giving an example of, like, Disney's very much about their intellectual property, and I actually have an eyewitness of them going after an intellectual property they used to hold, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and bringing it back over for use in the Epic Mickey game. And if that were able to be released into the public eye, or into, what's that called? Just
public domain.
uh, public domain. Thank you. Yeah, into public domain like that. Yeah, then you wouldn't be able to make. Well, I guess you could make that game, but it wouldn't be a Disney game. So I don't know. That feels like a non-answer, that I just don't feel well enough informed on that side of things to really know about what should be released into public domain and what should be held. Um, I tend to be kind of open source leaning, but at the same time, I recognize that people need to make money and be paid for their hard work. So it's a tricky question.
Yeah, I'm fine with copyright existing, but it's gotten so absurd where now it's like what, like 70 or 90 years, and after the author's death, and it's just it's ridiculous. I think
Yeah,
like at some point the work belongs to all of humanity, and this idea that we're going to be copywriting works for hundreds of years, which is the way we're heading as things currently stand, is just absurd. And I think that, like, imagine if Shakespeare's work wasn't in the public domain and nobody could
yeah,
access it unless you had to pay huge sums of money. And of course, I think you can still make work based off of Shakespeare's work. Like, you can still make movies. They still do make movies inspired by Shakespeare and based on Shakespeare's plays. It's just that they're not that the person who makes the movie doesn't have exclusive rights to all of Shakespeare's work. So they can still make
right.
money
Yeah,
off of it in products, but this is not GG related. We're gonna move on. Sorry.
yeah, but you know what? You're making a very compelling argument. I'm listening to you going, yeah, that all of that makes a lot of sense to me, and that you probably do want to sunset some sort of thing. And it's hard with Disney, because Mickey Mouse is such a huge part that it's weird for them to think about giving that up. But then I think, yeah, your example of Shakespeare's a beautiful one. It would be weird to think that you know Shakespeare's owned by Disney or something. That'd be strange. Yeah,
You obviously talked about how the new media, streamers, people making video content, have largely supplanted the games press. But do
Yes.
you still think that there is a role for a good text-based journalism in the games industry?
Yes. Yeah, I do think that. And you see it spring back to life. A lot of times these alternative press will kind of pop up. Like I used to read One Angry Gamer fairly often. Just so yeah, I do think that there's a value in games journalism. I just think that it shouldn't be so slanted, and it felt really for a while in the GamerGate phase, and even up to the modern time, like a lot of it feels very captured to me, like it's very slanted one way. But then there are the counterpoints that come out on YouTube, um, and on Twitter and other places. So maybe it's just kind of this weird symbiotic relationship where the gaming press is kind of really kind of I don't know, left leaning or very kind of progressive, and then they say their piece, and then all the YouTubers jump on it. I don't. That's what it seems like to me, I guess.
One angry
But,
gamer.
yeah.
That oh no. What have you done?
Well, is that a bad because bad reference? I mean, I remember when some of the GamerGate stuff was going on, I just went to their site a few times and said, "Oh, well, these guys are trying to cover this," and I don't
he
follow them anymore. So yeah.
he he I knew him. He was involved with GG in the beginning, and he burnt a lot of bridges and went crazy
Oh,
because he started advocating for censorship of games from a right wing angle. Mortal
oh,
Kombat, I
well,
believe it was. Boner culture. It became a whole thing. I'm pretty sure I did like a couple videos on it back in the day, and he was very much criticized by those of us on the creative freedom side of Gamergate. And then after he burnt all of those bridges with the GG crowd, he became like a far right Nazi. Like I'm not even kidding. Like
wow.
he like if you want to talk about someone who became, uh the alt right pipeline, like I don't know, maybe he's changed his mind since and become like a normal person, but like he actually did lose his mind and become like a far right lunatic.
Yeah, wow. I
I
did
can
not
give you
know
the
that.
receipts after we're off air if
Okay.
you want to see proof.
Well, I suspect that you're much better informed on all the details of what's going on since you've been covering this for quite some time, and I'm just kind of a gadfly on the side saying, well, here's what I think, but I have not delved into a lot of these stories.
In the first few weeks of Gamergate, it was revealed that 150 games journalists from competing publications were in a mailing group called Game Journal Pros. What did you think of this revelation?
Yeah, that seemed well, I didn't know what to think, to be honest, when that came out, because it was presented as like, well, this is almost like a conspiracy that these guys work behind the scenes to position themselves. At the same time, I could kind of see like a professional guild of journalists interacting and talking about their craft and what was going on in the games industry to share scoops and stories. But I it felt like it was being used maliciously with the intent to orchestrate stories. And I think that's a bad thing if if they're working together to try and push a certain narrative. That's what it felt like. And if that was the case, then yeah, that was a bad thing. But it's one of those things I didn't feel well enough informed on. I just heard about it and thought, man, I hope that's not. It's funny as time goes on. I keep hearing more and more stories. Like when I was on Clownfish TV, Neon's channel over there, he was saying that he thinks a lot of these folks in journalism are really just kind of petty and want to hurt people, and they're not doing it for any other reason than kind of just power tripping. And I was kind of surprised that the people would really do that and just put aside their ethics to do so. So I don't know.
I know this was
I don't.
before you got involved with the conversation, but did you watch the SPJ Airplay event organized by the Society of Professional Journalists and Michael Koretsky?
I did not. I saw none of that.
Okay. Some Gamergate supporters believed that pressuring advertisers to pull out would be a good way to convince gaming publications to initiate ethical reforms. What do you think of that strategy? Were you aware of that?
Yeah, it's basically a boycott strategy, right? It's basically saying,
Secondary boycotts, pressuring the
yeah,
advertisers of the sites to pull out by threatening to boycott the advertisers, essentially. Or well, not necessarily that, but it could take many different forms. That's like one form it could take. Another form it could take would be telling them, "Here's what Gawker has done. Do you want to support this with your money?" And then let them make
yeah,
their own decision.
yeah. I think in general, consumers kind of organizing like that is generally a good thing. You know, saying, "Hey, we're consumers of this. You may want to be aware that some of your consumer base is unhappy with these folks for these reasons." And I think that's fine. It's just kind of an informational thing. And then if they feel like they need to organize, that's also fine. I really don't have a problem. Like when the folks wanted to boycott Hogwarts Legacy because they felt it was somehow, making J.K. Rowling uber ultra rich or something. That's fine. I don't mind that they wanted to boycott. It just wasn't effective. Um, so I don't have a problem with anybody boycotting anything for any ideological reason if they think it's right. And do what you think is best. It's part of living in kind of a creative, free, open market society.
Bringing it to creative freedom for a minute, do you remember the various controversies regarding things like Change the Cover, Lionhead Studios, and the Pillars of Eternity controversy?
I don't remember that one in particular. I remember some other things that seems like, yeah, they were changing, I don't know, clothes or things that were coming from some Japanese games, but yeah, I don't remember that one in particular. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes. We can get to localization. So obviously, a lot of games when they're brought over, um, are localized in a way where they take out large amounts of the content. Ace Combat 3, Fire Emblem Fates, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, many other examples. Do you have any thoughts on that practice as a developer?
Okay, so I think the reasons for why games get censored or changed when they move between territories, well, it varies. And sometimes it's for a good reason that is based on some law in the area. Like, for example, when we used to ship our games into Germany, and this is kind of crazy, but when I used to work on wrestling games, they had a rule that you couldn't show blood in a wrestling game. And so we had to make all of our blood stains in the German edition only into green or blue to represent spit or vomit, right? It couldn't be blood, which was crazy, but this is back in the PlayStation 1 days. And so there's a change where somebody might say, well, you're being censored, but you're not. Well, you were doing it because you wanted to be in a market that the market would not allow you to be there otherwise. And so sometimes that happens. And so I can see a case of like, okay, a game coming from Japan, maybe it's coming over and it's maybe too mature to be in the market that they want it to be in. And so they have to censor to hit their market just for sales numbers. And that I don't really object to. But what I do object to is when somebody in a localization role and they're like, well, I don't like what the game has to say here, or I don't like the position of this political thing they're saying, and so we're going to change it to fit my sentiments better. And there are cases of this happening that I've seen. That then I start to go, okay, now you're censoring for ideological reasons and not being true to the game or to the property, and that's where my personal line lies, is in the creative freedom line. If it's a Japanese game that and somehow offends you, or a Korean game or whatever, just don't play it if it's not the right sensibility. That's kind of where my opinion is there.
As an artist, do you feel like they're butchering the artistic work that you've created?
Yeah, it drives me nuts when they go through and cut things out because they feel it doesn't hit sensibilities. Like when they were Roald Dahl, right? The author who wrote those children's books, and they started cutting words out of the books because they felt that they weren't right to the sensibilities. I mean, that's serious violence to your cultural traditions. So yeah, I'm very opposed to anybody censoring an artistic product along ideological or political lines. If you disagree with it, you can make yourself known or explain why, sure, but don't go and cut it out of the game.
Now, video games, I consider them art. Do you consider them art?
I do. In fact, I'm on record as saying I think they're the ultimate art form. I actually think that because they're participatory, that they engage the player in a way that others art forms do not. I consider them to be like an art form that can really impact humanity in terms of their emotion, how they view the world. I think that they're what all the other art forms aspire to be.
Now, video games aren't unique in being the only form of art where it's also a commercial product. So it's not just your vision as a developer you have to take into account. It's also the CEO, the shareholders, the marketing team, all of these different other players in the corporate capitalist infrastructure that you have to interact with and that can influence certain decisions about the game. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. In fact, as the game gets bigger and bigger, you get more and more fingers in the pie.
How do you feel about that model?
Yeah, since I'm retired now, I kind of reflect back on how I saw the game industry change over time. I feel like early on, when you got into games, or when I got into the games, which is the mid '90s, as a developer, you had to be passionate. You had to really care about what you're working on because you weren't sure you were getting a paycheck. It wasn't a well-established industry at all. It was very high risk, and so everybody was very passionate about it and worked very hard. And I think that's where we probably got into both some good habits and some bad habits. The overtime hours and that sort of stuff all started in that um, desire to make great art, which I think a lot of us felt we were making when we were first getting into the games because we wanted to make stuff like what we had experienced. But over time, as the game industry grew and grew and grew and became very popular, it switched from being all about enthusiasm and started to become more and more about money making, which is fine, but it turned more and more Hollywood as the investments got bigger, executives got more involved, and now we're at a point where I think, at least in the AAA games industry, it's really, really difficult to make a good game without it just being beaten up along the way by all the different pressures that are put upon it from the money side. Now there's all the problems from just how it's going to be received in the market. So you have all these uh, what analyses that they do now. They're trying to product position before the game is even put into design, right? They're trying to figure out what it is they're trying to make. It's just like Hollywood. And so I feel like a lot of the artistic vision has started to slip from the AAA industry and move into the independent games development, where that's where you see a lot of the passionate art being done. And then the AAA industry, I think, is now chasing the independents, and they're borrowing a lot of the good things that you see in independent design and bringing them over into AAA design. For example, Slay the Spire, which is a great, card deck building game, looks to me like it strongly influenced Marvel's Midnight Suns, which was put out by Firaxis, and a great game, by the way. But that's, first you see the idea proven independently and then adopted later by AAA. And I think you're going to keep seeing that happen in the industry. So if you want to do like cool art, go independent. If you want to make, big games where there's a lot of corporate overhead and you're working as more of a cog in the wheel, then AAA is where that is. That's the police force of the game industry now.
Would you have liked to have seen GamerGate take on industry practices like microtransactions or crunch time for developers or misleading marketing?
Yes, and I feel like Gamergate kind of did towards the end for kind of the microtransaction stuff. It seems like there was a Gamergate contingent that was pushing back against the Star Wars game. It still felt to me like that was still
Oh,
going on.
Battlefront 2. No,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
the
that was it.
remake of Battlefront 2.
Right, yeah. At least that's it's stuck in my head. So yeah, I feel like it's good when consumers say, "Hey, we hate this microtransaction garbage," and push back. I'm always in favor of consumers telling telling the big executive teams, we don't want you to bilk us this way with giving us incomplete games that are buggy or lots of microtransactions. I'm very much consumer oriented there. And I don't know if you're following the Baldur's Gate 3 kind of mini controversy, but I am very much in the camp of Baldur's Gate 3 uh, is a great game that much of us in the industry should learn from. rather than we should lament as being, oh, it's too big or it's too complete, and the people are complaining about it being too good of a game. And I can't believe that. I'm like, man, just just be inspired by it.
We have a question from the chat here. I'll read it.
Sure.
It's from Captain Carbine. Could part of the reason for the gaming industry becoming more like Hollywood is that the gaming sphere expanded to attract more people from the mainstream? Well, I did reword his question a bit, but from the mainstream.
Yes, that's very insightful. In fact, I remember when games started to get big, um, when a lot of the directors started to take a lot of interest. You remember Steven Spielberg in particular got involved in trying to make games. I think well, he was involved in, I don't know, Roboblocks or something. But there was a Hollywood push to try and come in and teach all of us video game guys how to make games great. In fact, Jurassic Park Trespasser, that game came out around 1990, 96, 97, and that was heralding like, okay, Hollywood's going to come in and they're going to show us how to make games profitable, and they're going to be great, and they're going to be cinematic. And it really fell apart because at that time, Hollywood didn't seem to understand that games, because they're participatory, are a completely different development cycle than movies are, and that collision that happened, I think, in the late 1990s, started us on a path towards the Hollywoodization of AAA. That it just started the ball rolling towards bigger and bigger cinematics and more that direction, which is fine. A lot of people love it, but that's where I think it got started. Does that kind of answer that question? That I do think that, yeah, it really did become Hollywoodized as the money came in and as Hollywood took notice.
Yeah, it was a question from chat, so I don't know if it answered it or not, because I'm not him. But he'll probably reply in a minute. Um, when I was younger, I had a perception that I love gaming, but it does seem like there is this trend in the industry to try and almost like, I'm not sure I'd say dumb things down, but simplify things. Because I used to play a lot of games like Resident Evil, these
Hmm.
survival horror games, and of course, are you familiar with that series?
Yes, yeah,
Okay. So the original games were much more survival horror focused, but over time the series took on a much more action adventure kind of feel, which is
yes,
fine. I do like Resident Evil 4. I do like Resident Evil 5. I think they're really good games actually, but it seems like a lot of the changes were made to make it appeal to a wider audience than just the very niche market of people who like this limited ammunition, extremely low health, you're gonna die in 3 hits, from anything, kind of gameplay, and they made it much more of a run around, blow shit up kind of thing, which is
right,
cool.
yeah,
There's a place for games like that for sure, um, and they were done well. But I felt like we were moving away from these more niche markets or games like Descent, where you would have, it's like this
hmm.
extremely, extremely. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I used to play Descent on a LAN server uh, back in Morpheus Interactive in 1995. It was awesome. We loved that game. Descent was great.
Yeah, it was great. But it seems like there was a move away from these more niche products, these more niche genres. And even when games were made in those genres, in theory, a lot of the mechanics had been changed to make it more easy for the everyday person who isn't familiar with that kind of specific niche to jump in.
Yeah. No, I totally agree that over time, as the game industry's grown and grown, it's necessarily become more and more mass market, trying to funnel people into the games. What what I think is interesting is that games like Baldur's Gate 3 and some others have shown that you can kind of appeal both to the mass market and to the more, I don't know what you call them. What would you call them? More hardcore gamers, I guess. Guys who like more of a challenge through things like difficulty levels or changing how the game fits together. Just just generally in terms of what they lay out to you or what they expose to you as you experience the game. So I think there's a way to get there, but You're absolutely right that over time, as games have gotten broader, they've moved more and more mass market, where the more hardcore stuff, I think, tends to be independent. In fact, Hogwarts Legacy, since we talked about that earlier, that there was a lot of push when we were developing that to make it deliberately more mass market, because we knew that many of the players of Hogwarts Legacy may not have ever played an RPG open world style game ever, right? That they were coming to it because they wanted to experience the wizarding world and create their wizard. And so Hogwarts Legacy, from a design standpoint, had that difficult challenge of how do you funnel people in who have never touched a game like this, but still be appealing and interesting to people who have played, a whole bunch of them. And I think they struck a pretty good balance there, um, because in the end, Hogwarts Legacy is not a really great or innovative game from a gameplay standpoint, but I think it hit all the right notes from a property standpoint and from making people feel like they were really engaged with the Wizarding World, which was the note that it needed to hit and why it was so successful.
Right, I think that's the best way to do it, where you have, oh fuck, I was playing a game the other day where I felt they did a really good job of introducing different gameplay elements very over time. So you're not just like, oh, I'm thrown in and I'm thrown into Europa Universalis and I have no idea what I'm doing, but where it'll gradually introduce the mechanics, and so you're learning it as you go. I can't remember what game it was. They did it so well though.
Yeah, I like Hogwarts Legacy being built by Avalanche, because they did the Avalanche, or they did the Infinity games, which were aimed at younger audience, right? So I think you can see some of that legacy coming into Hogwarts Legacy as players are introduced to the game. If you're not a new player to an open world RPG, Hogwarts Legacy is a pretty light introduction. It'll teach you, the main mechanics, and then if you go and play the more hardcore ones, you'll be well versed in it. So I think they did a pretty good job of introducing people to it.
Oh, Final Fantasy 14. Final Fantasy
Oh,
14. They have a
I
very
haven't
good
played that.
tutorial. Very good tutorial. Because it's not even a tutorial. It's throwing you in, and then as you naturally progress, it teaches you more and more things. But it's not all at once. It's over the course of the game, so you're not getting sucked out of it.
I should check that out. I really appreciate a well-made tutorial that teaches you a lot of stuff and is fun. I mean, that's hard to do. Yeah.
And I do feel like obviously you're more of a AAA dev, but I feel like a lot of indie developers too. We have seen this resurgence in more niche markets. Like one game that I've played recently that I love is Signalis. Have you played that?
I have not played that one.
It's an indie game, but I think it was made by like 2 or 3 people, and it's made very much in the vein of Resident Evil and like these old ancient survival horror games. But it's very well done, amazing. I have not beat it yet, but I'm a kind of a scaredy cat when it comes to horror games. I love them, but I get too scared sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know, we're just talking horror games. So I've played a lot of Dead by Daylight. When Dead by Daylight first came out, I was an early adopter, and I was like, "Oh man, this game is so cool!" And then over time, it became this huge phenomenon. But that was a game that I thought did multiplayer horror super well. I really give a lot of props to those developers.
Yeah, I've played a
Shout out. Yeah.
little bit of Dead by Daylight. I'd really enjoyed the like have you played like Until Dawn or The Quarry?
No, I haven't played either of those.
They're more like interactive movie type games, but they're very well done for multiplayers too, especially The Quarry because it's 8 people. So I had a friend group and we only had 6 people actually, but 2 people control 2 characters. But you make the decisions that your characters make, and they interact with each other, and so it's really interesting to see how different people are going to play their character, and there's like so many different variations. Like the choices really do matter throughout the entire story. So you choose whether or not you're going to betray someone to save yourself, things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love games that make you feel like the choices that you make have an outcome that maybe is unique to you. Like, oh, I bet nobody's seen this before. I love that when that happens in a game.
Now I know you've talked a little bit about your politics. You said you're a bit more libertarianish.
Yeah, I consider myself kind of centrist, libertarian-ish. Yeah, lean a little bit and cap, but I'm also got a little bit of left socialist stuff too. I don't know. Libertarian socialist is probably, or libertarian centrist is probably closest.
What's a better future to live in? Deus Ex or Ian M. Banks the Culture?
I don't know. I'm not. I don't feel like I'm familiar enough. I haven't played enough Deus Ex, or I'm familiar. Yeah, I don't feel I can answer with those two comparisons.
Fair enough. Fair
Um,
enough.
uh, if you're asking me what I think the future holds, I mean, I made some videos on the rise of artificial intelligence and video games. I'm one of these guys who thought back around 2002 that the Turing test would be passed by 2025, and made some bets with some of my friends in game development, and I think I'm going to win those bets now. That I think the Turing test will be passed this next year. So I think our future as humanity is well, I'll be honest. I kind of think by 2036, I think humanity will be completely dependent on our machines, because artificial intelligence will be so good at imitating humans that it'll be hard to tell us apart. We'll be at a point of counterfeit humanity by 2036. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But asking about what the future lies, I think that video games have shown us that we can create these really rich worlds that are just completely engrossing, and they're only going to get better and better. And as we head into the future, like stuff with VR, stuff with the Apple Vision, um, uh, to me, the future looks like a world of VR and gaming, and maybe humans just plugged into their virtual universes while the robots go on to conquer the universe or something.
Have your politics changed due to Gamergate, or were they influenced by Gamergate?
Somewhat. So prior to Gamergate, I like if it was about 2012, 2013, I probably would have just readily said, "Hey, are you a feminist?" I would have instantly said yes. Like, yeah, no problem. Because to me, a feminist back in 2013 was like Camille Paglia or Christina Hoff Sommers, that equality feminism, all about uh, opportunity and allowing women to do whatever they want to do in the world, and knocking down those barriers. So to me, that was feminism. And then when feminist frequency hit and then Gamergate came around, I was suddenly exposed to this neo-feminism, which then I guess is now called like third wave feminism, that Andrea Dworkin, Catherine McKinnon sort of feminism, where it's men are fundamentally bad, that there's something wrong with masculinity. And that was the first I had really been exposed to it. And so you say, did Gamergate change my politics? It did. It made me start asking questions about, well, what do you mean by feminism when people ask questions about feminism? Um, because I'm in favor of one type, but not the other type. And I was unaware of that blind spot until this came around.
Are you okay with gaming sites criticizing games through a political or religious lens, such as a Marxist, feminist, Christian, or other lens?
Sure, absolutely. As long as they do so and are open about it, you know. Uh, if they want to criticize it, this is a feminist lens, like Anita was doing. That's perfectly okay. It's when it gets adopted as it's the only lens, or it's the correct lens, and that any sort of counter criticism is taken as harassment, which is what Sarkeesian said herself in that Mashable interview in 2017. He asked her specifically, "Have you ever interacted with your critics?" And she said, "I have no critics. I only have harassers." And that is the position, I think, of a lot of folks who are in that kind of woke religion, is that you cannot criticize them because they already have the truth. And that's what I object to.
Okay, I've not seen that specific quote from Anita, so I can't verify it for the book. If you could send
Mashable
it to me,
2017. So yeah.
I know that in the United Nations, she said that you suck and you're a liar count as criticism. I know that, or count as harassment. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, count as harassment. Yeah. Well, I've I guess I've been harassed quite a bit myself then.
Now I ask a lot of people if they can, what they think of the framing of Gamergate as the first battle of the culture war. You kind of hinted at this yourself already earlier. Is that how you see Gamergate?
I didn't at the time, but in hindsight, I've started to see it as one of the, as if not the first, but one of the first instances of where it seemed like you can, in hindsight, look back at it and say, I can see where the first lines are starting to be drawn. Um, like I listened to James Lindsay, I listened to Peter Boghossian, and some of these guys who were talking about the culture war in the academy. Writing these books like Cynical Theories, and just talking about how it was happening at that level. And they were comparing the social justice movement to religion around the same time frame in 2014, 2015. And so, yeah, I think that to me, a lot of it is very religious in nature. That there was the new atheism movement that started around 2005 2006 had a lot of people start to lose their religious faith, and I think sweeping into it, the social justice movement was there to pick it up and say, here's something that's good and noble that you can join up with, and it just it became like a new religious position. And that's really how I saw it happening then. It's kind of a counter religion.
What do you think of the framing of Gamergate as a battle within the left between those who believe in small L liberal democratic values, the pluralism that you speak of, for instance, and
Hmm.
those who don't?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it, actually. Because the small, liberalism, that's where I consider myself to be that classical liberal. Yeah, and we were resisting the authoritarian elitist left that was like, here's how it needs to be. Do you agree with that framing, by the way? What do you think?
I think it's a very useful framing. I don't think it tells the whole story. There were some conservative people who supported Gamergate. Um, but I think, well, even most of the conservative, I don't know, actually, I don't know if it's true. There were conservative people who supported Gamergate. Now, how liberal those conservatives were, I don't know. Some of them were. I've got some liberal people in my community, um, who supported Gamergate, and they're like moderate conservatives. But there were obviously people like the one angry gamer guy, and he doesn't believe in liberalism, not even small L liberalism. I'm not even sure he believes in democracy anymore. So, like, so I don't know, but that's so I think it's a good framing because those of us who were, I was more like centrist back then. I'm way more left wing now, but those of us back then, we believed in pluralism, open discussion, debate, free
Right.
speech, having the discussion, and instead of shutting it down, in the value of hearing opposing arguments, and living in a pluralistic society where you have to take into account the interests of a large array of stakeholders and not just like one perspective that's going to stifle everything else. That's how we saw it. We even called them like the regressive left and stuff like that. The
Yes.
people who
Yeah.
were against free speech and against video games being made that they didn't like. So I think
Yeah.
it's a good framing, but it does miss like the small percentage of people who were more right wing and maybe went down a different path where they abandoned liberal democracy.
Yeah. So I do think that there was, and I don't know if Gamergate or, was a convenient way for them to land on things. But there was definitely kind of a right-leaning, anti-feminist, uh, I don't know, attitude that was also present. I think in some of the GamerGate side that I could see how it would lead down that very nationalist sort of like we need to have these really strict rules. Um, yeah, I don't know. My experience was that I was aware of kind of this right-leaning thing, but it felt to me that it was more about classical liberal values than it was about anything that was uniquely right. Like, nothing that really stands out to me as right wing, although the regressive left kept calling it right wing, which was really strange. I mean, I kept getting called, and I still get called alt right. And I'm like, well, I have no nationalist agenda. I'm not at all, in favor of what I think the alt right is supposed to be. I haven't voted right wing in ever. I don't even know if I've ever voted on the right. Anyway, it's just kind of strange that they call anybody to the right of their position all right.
So obviously you talked with a lot of pro Gamergate people, or well, I don't know if you talked with a lot of them, but a lot of them liked your stuff.
Yeah.
And Did you interact with any of those pro GamerGate people, and what was that like doing so?
Mostly I did so through the comments on my YouTube channels. I always kept my comments open, and so I would respond to both criticisms and compliments there. So that's where I would respond. I did interact with a few who took it offline, and we would email for a while. And a few I even started doing some voice calls with from time to time, just to talk about things going on in the games industry. All of them seemed very kind with me personally. I had very few people who wanted to engage with me that turned out to be jerks. They all seemed like they were sincere and in good faith, and that made me feel good about being kind of on the more pro side of Gamergate. Was that the people I interacted with always felt to me like they were trying to behave themselves as adults. Um, so yeah, I did interact with some of them, and my experience was, they were good folk.
What about anti-GamerGate people? Did you talk to some of them?
Yeah, a few of them. Usually, they would do drive-bys. It would be like, "Okay, I'm just coming to tell you that you are a complete idiot and totally wrong," and then they'd block me, or that sort of thing. Like I had an interaction with Brianna Wu in particular that to me kind of typified the whole thing. So you know that Brianna Wu, there was a screenshot of her on her Steam page, I think, or something, where she had posted, I've heard Brianna Wu. This is me remembering. Brianna Wu is an awful developer. What do you guys think? Do your worst, something like that. And then somebody realized that she had forgotten to log out and called her out on it. And so it ended up somebody screenshotted her, basically what looked like she was soliciting for harassment, like saying, "Hey, what's wrong with Brianna Wu? Tell me all her problems." So I asked her. I just said, I took that screenshot and I sent it to her over Twitter. And I said, "Did you really do this?" And she came back and said, "Yes, I did. I was just trying to consolidate the harassment." And I said, "Well, that seemed kind of odd." And she blocked me immediately, right? And that has always been my interaction with somebody who was like on the other side. Is as soon as you said, "Well, this is even a little bit strange," bam, they block you, just gone. So I don't feel like I had too much interaction with people who were, I guess, critical. They just wanted to tell me I was wrong and leave.
Yeah, she might be willing to talk with you now. She started to become more moderate in recent years, and she's done two conversations with the Hat Man, the person who ran Kotaku in Action for most of GamerGate, and also with PSA Sitch, another YouTuber who supported GamerGate. And she might be part of this project. We'll see if she is interested. But
Yeah, so one of the videos I made, the last one I made was while I worked for WB, and it was Nolan Bushnell did nothing wrong. And in that one I called out Brianna Wu for her attacks on Nolan Bushnell to get the IGDA, or the Game Developers Choice Award, whatever it was at the time. And yeah, I think she took it as a personal attack, because when the game press articles came out about me later, she said, "This person attacked me personally," meaning I attacked her personally, and so that nobody should buy Hogwarts Legacy because of that.
how could the GamerGate conversation have been more productive?
Yeah, wow, what a good question. I wish that there would have been more open forums for discussion. Uh, and I think that if somebody in the gaming press would have said, "Hey, there's something going on here. Let's have some more open forums with people from all sides," that I think it could have actually developed into a needed discussion rather than just a shouting match. I'm going back to when Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, went to that video con where Anita Sarkeesian was there, and he sat quietly in the audience, and she called him out as, making just endless videos about her. And he said, "I just want a discussion." And she was like, "No way." And to me, that was part of the problem, was it was all kind of one-sided.
This was before you got involved in the controversy, but do you remember Not Your Shield?
Yes, I looked that up, and I thought that was a good maneuver to say. Yeah, don't hold us up as minorities as shielding your weird ideology. Yeah.
You mentioned that
I
some.
was
Oh God.
I was just gonna say I was supportive of Not My Shield. I thought that was a good move. Yeah.
You mentioned that some websites were shutting down discussion of this. Why do you think they did that?
I think to control the narrative. That I think that when people shut down discussions, it's almost always because they're trying to deny people access to some information that might change the way they're viewing things. And they don't want people to change the way they're viewing things, and so they close out that information. And so that's why they shut them down. That's why, like, on Kotaku, they'll say no discussion of Hogwarts Legacy is allowed because, somebody might actually say, "Hey, this game's pretty fun." And then it countermands their whole position of trying to boycott the game. So to me, yeah, it's anytime you're shutting down discussion, it's bad. It's and that's why they're doing it too, is because they don't want their position to be challenged.
At the risk of you repeating me asking you to repeat yourself, why do you think some people claimed that Gamergate was about harassment and hating women?
Well, I think there was a small contingent that was doing that, but it was mostly a smokescreen, I think, to keep attention away from the main discussion, which the data shows was happening about collusion, corruption, and censorship happening between, ethics and games journalism. That to me was the main discussion, but the story being pushed was harassment. And yeah, that's my take on it. And it's still the story that they still push, right? It's still the Wikipedia entry. Oh, it was just an attack on women because people hate women, I guess. There's no even real explanation of why people were attacking. They just are bad. It's crazy. Yeah, it's Orwellian in the way that Wikipedia presents Gamergate.
Now, obviously, you were an observer throughout Gamergate, but from your experience, did the movement do a good job of condemning harassment?
At times, it's weird to me because there's no like head to Gamergate, right? Different people were engaged and saying different positions. Of the voices that I listened to in Gamergate, I felt like they always came out and said very clearly, "Don't harass, don't go after these people. It's counterproductive, and it's also just immoral." Like I used to listen to Sargon Avocad, Carl Benjamin on this, and I remember he said that every single time. Like he was always do not harass, but at the same time, he would do a little bit of name calling, which I guess Anita feels is harassment. But he was just strongly saying his position. Total Biscuit, right at the time, was saying that same sort of thing too. So the voices I was listening to were saying do not harass, and harassment is bad, but we should talk about these other issues still.
Yeah, and Total Biscuit, to his credit, did point out a specific individual who had engaged in harassment, or well, it's complicated. An individual who had engaged in kind of cyber stalky behavior, unrelated to Gamergate, but obviously made the movement look bad. So him and almost everybody else seemed to have condemned him, and he went away. Now it's complicated because this guy actually just reached out to me recently,
Hmm.
and he's like, "Hey, look, I was a high school kid. I was doing some dumb shit. I'm not that person anymore." So if that's true, heck, it's weird because we're 10 years removed from this almost. So
Right.
how much if somebody did something when they were in high school, like we probably criminally we wouldn't hold them responsible for that now. So how do we think about that looking back historically? And I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I think it would be totally worthwhile to say, well, what's your perspective on it? How has your mind changed? So, yeah, it seems like a voice worth listening to.
Yeah, you don't have to talk about it or answer, but did you experience any harassment from either side or from third-party trolls?
Well, yes. I mean, depending upon your definition of harassment, I never received anything like a death threat, like somebody was going to come and kill me, or dox me or anything that was like the serious level of harassment that I think I would have to report. But I got lots of, you suck, you're an idiot, go die, like I hate you, and I still get that to this day. After the press articles came out on Twitter, I noticed that I had a lot of sudden attacks, like people just tweeting at me and tagging me as being an awful person. And then I went away from social media because of family issues and I was trying to forget about it. Then when I came back, I noticed that they had deleted all of their tweets, that all of these things that people had done back when it was a hot topic were all gone now. And I've heard from people that that's pretty common, that they go and attack somebody all at once when they're kind of going through that cancellation from a bunch of bot accounts or accounts that they've made just to harass people. And then they go back and delete them all later so there's no record of it and they can't really be followed up on. So I've had that happen to me.
Why do you think the media didn't cover the harassment that GamerGate people received?
Didn't fit the narrative, basically. Um, I think they wanted a nice, clean, easy to understand narrative. The Colbert Report, when he asked Anita, what's the deal? There's all these games. And she's like, well, it's because men just don't want us in the space. This very simple, oversimplified description that's easy to glob onto is what they wanted to push as a narrative, even though it didn't reflect reality at all. I don't think men were resisting women coming into the space at all, as from what I could tell. That was just her story. It
Did
was
you
like, come on in here. Yeah.
did you see the Zack attack controversy?
Zack attack. I remember hearing about it, but no, I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Some Gamergate supporters broke away from the movement to form GG Revolt, a new movement against both Gamergate and the so-called social justice warriors. At its height, this group had about 60 people. Do you have any thoughts on this breakaway faction?
First I've heard of it, I think. GG
Okay.
Revolt. Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. What do you think of the term sea lining and how it was used by Gamergate critics?
Yeah. No, I think there's something to the sea lioning thing because I've had that happen to me too, where people just start asking you these kind of pointless questions, trying to bog you down and just answering, endless bunch of questions. Um, but I think that a lot of times it was being used as a way to deflect criticism. That somebody would ask a rather pointed or important question, and they'll just say, "Oh, you're just sea lioning," rather than dealing with the question. But at the same time, I can understand that sometimes you get overwhelmed with questions that are not in good faith, and then you have the problem of what do you do with those? I myself tend to just kind of ignore and pretend like I didn't see the questions that are clearly not in good faith. The ones that are aimed at trying to trip you up. Like, have you stopped beating your wife? That's not a question that's in good faith.
I know you said you can only go for a couple hours. We're approaching about 1 hour and 40 minutes, a little bit over that. Uh, we're about three-quarters of the way through the questions. Did you feel comfortable continuing, or do you want to speed things up a bit?
Well, I've got about maybe 15 more minutes, so
Okay. Well, we better
yeah,
we
we're
better
only
speed things up.
yeah, yeah.
All right. What do you think about how the media covered Gamergate, and did anyone reach out to you for comment as someone who was talking about it at the time?
Nope, nobody reached out to me from the press. And I think they did for the controversy on Hogwarts Legacy. So I did get some people asking about that, but not on Gamergate. Um, so yeah, nobody asked me about Gamergate at all.
What do you think the
What was it?
media? Oh, good.
Oh, there was a second part about you were asking about
Oh,
how they.
yes. How they covered it.
Yeah, yeah. I just felt like they were pushing an easy to understand narrative.
Did
So
this
yeah, it was
did
poor
this
coverage.
coverage decrease your trust in media?
Oh yeah, it absolutely did, especially in our own games media. Like I said before, when the press articles first dropped around 2014, I thought there must be some real problem there, and the more I investigated, the more it looked like no, this was a much smaller and more of a petty thing. that identity politics where they were trying to push an agenda. And so, yeah, it changed my position on the gaming press in particular quite a bit.
If a journalist who got GamerGate wrong in your eyes is reading this now, what do you want them to reconsider?
Um, uh, to me, I think they should just investigate, consider the possibility that there's more to the story. I mean, I don't feel like people have to agree with me on everything. I just hope that people try and have well-informed positions and try and, examine all positions. If they feel like they've got a pretty good handle on the different positions and disagree with me, that's cool. But I mostly find myself disappointed with that blocking mentality of I already have the truth, and so anything you have to say is flat out wrong, and I'm just here to preach at you. That's where I am disappointed.
What's your favorite video game?
It changes all the time, and I have a hard time picking favorites. Um, in terms of lots of hours, I really put a lot into XCOM 2, and I really like the Firaxis team with Jake Solomon, although they've left Firaxis now. So I think that's a great game. I've been playing a ton of Baldur's Gate 3 lately. I think that's a very well done game, although it's buggier than I think it should be. I put a lot of time into Elite Dangerous. Man, I could go on and on and on about all the games that I like, and it changes all the time. So I don't know that I have one favorite game though. To me, I experience each game on its kind of its merits and let it take me for its journey. And sometimes I find that very wonderful, and sometimes I find it, underwhelming.
Yeah, the XCOM games are great. Like what the expansion to
Yeah,
XCOM 2, oh my gosh. It's amazing.
yeah, the Chosen. Yeah,
Yeah, War of the Chosen.
yeah, loved it. Excellent, really good stuff.
Do you have any thoughts on Vivian James or Gamergate related art projects?
Yeah, I liked the Vivian James art project. I used it in several of my videos. I used her as a representative, just kind of saying. I loved how she was always just like fed up with the whole thing. That attitude that she had was my favorite. It was just like, oh my gosh, this again. Yeah.
What was your favorite moment during Gamergate?
I don't know. I felt like coming back and picking back over it. I didn't. I felt like I was an investigator coming to the scene after it had all kind of blown over. So I don't know. I don't know that I have a favorite moment. Do you have a favorite moment? I mean, is there something that stands out to you?
Oh no. Oh no, I ask everybody this question. Uh, oh man, it's a
I'm
difficult one to
turning. I'm
answer.
turning the tables. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard because I'm like, yeah,
Um, hmm. I think I'm not sure it's not a moment, but the people I met along the way were amazing. As for a specific incident,
yeah,
maybe writing the book, but that's after Gamergate happened, the first book I wrote. Um,
yeah.
I did it in like 2 months, and I have over 200 sources. It was
Wow.
a passion project for sure. Every day after
Yeah,
work, pretty much, just boom, 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 right, research. Well, I knew most of the I knew most of the incidents, so I just had to find the sources, verify the sources, things like that. But I was so heavily involved in the movement that it all this was 2019. It all flew right back into my mind instantly.
yeah. I haven't read it. Sounds like I should. 200 sources. You probably got the definitive work.
Yeah, there's I love the work. It's actually I think it holds up very well. I think the ending where I talk about how we can improve our discourse and move on from here. I think that needs to be reworked because, well, I don't know how we improve our discourse. I really don't. And I thought if we just engaged with one another, um, things might be different. But our politics is so heated today, and nobody talks to each other. They only talk in their echo chambers, and I don't know.
Right. I mean, yeah, we were talking earlier, and that was my concern is that I did that an open letter to Anita Sarkeesian. I was a bit snarky in it, but I'm totally willing to get out and talk to people who are on opposite sides of this. But I don't even know what the opposite side is because I'm just in favor of everybody getting along and making good games and trying to figure out how to get there. but it seems like there's that elitist group that just wants to block you. That just, you're not on the right team, and so you're blocked. And I don't know how you reach out to people who are blocking you, and so yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how you do that. It becomes just about, like, it becomes religious, is what it is. You're not of the right religion.
Obviously, you weren't involved, but as an observer, if you could have changed one thing about Gamergate, what would it have been?
Well, if I could change one thing, it would be the animosity that it turned into something so ugly. When I think that we had and still do have issues within the games industry that need to be addressed, kind of as a culture of gamers, as a culture of developers, and that it made it so kind of ugly right out of the gate, um, and hard for us to, it seems, to talk to each other without the politics. So, but I think, podcasts or interviews or books like yours are a step in the right direction, because you are trying to talk to different people and get different perspectives and say, this is the hard work. What you're doing right here is getting the people to talk to each other that might have different opinions, and synthesizing them and making sense of it. So I think that's the way for us to move forward. But that's a very classical liberal approach. The solution to free speech is more free speech. The solution to dialogue and discussion is more dialogue and discussion. It's always about getting more information moving ahead. It's really hard to talk to somebody if they think they've already got all the answers.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get more anti-Gamergate people. I've got 4 confirmed anti-GG people, um, but 2 of them are doing text interviews only, not
Uh,
voice. So it's not the same. It's just responding to a questionnaire basically. And I'm gonna probably send some follow-ups maybe depending on what they say, but it's not the same. It's voice is having a real conversation like this. I feel like, one, it's better for the book, and two, I think it allows you to be challenged, and me to be challenged too, live.
yeah, I think it's good. I feel like I kind of wander about trying to put my thoughts into words. So, make me look smart if you put me in the book.
Everyone's gonna be in the book. I'm even interviewing a third-party troll who just fucked with people on both sides.
Oh, wow.
He's one of the people
Wow.
who actually sent a threat to Brianna Wu, and
Really?
he
Yeah.
also allegedly, uh, there's some other stuff too, but I'm not gonna say too much before I he harassed people on both sides. He harassed some GamerGate people too.
Yeah. And I wondered, I figured some people were doing that, right? That they were probably just like, woohoo, everybody fight. I love it.
Yeah, there definitely were. There were a lot of people like that. Well, when I say a lot, I mean like at least probably a couple dozen people who were
Yeah. It
just trying to fuck
doesn't,
with everybody.
yeah. And that's what the data showed from Twitter too, right? That women action in the media, when they went and gathered it, was like, it looks like it's just coming from a few accounts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, moving towards the end, let's say it's 10 years from now, and an online movement is looking to Gamergate, Black Lives Matter, and Occupy Wall Street for guidance for their movement. What advice do you have for them?
Wow. What a, an interesting question. Well, I don't, um, for me, the most important thing in any sort of movement, and I guess in the case of, like Gamergate, you would have an ideological stance that you're trying to say. In this case, I'd say it was the classical liberal position that we're viewing it from. That to me, the thing to be successful in any movement is that you're going to have to figure out what your ideals and principles are up front, and then make sure you hold yourselves to those same standards. So if you're, in this case, in Gamergate's case, the classical liberal standards, I think you have to say, here's my position. I'm for free speech. I'm against censorship. I'm against collusion. I'm against corruption. And then you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. Uh, because it seems to me the problems start when those movements um, eat themselves, like Black Lives Matter. It seems to be an example of where they said that they had these positions, and then certain elements within it started to go against those positions, and they become hypocritical. And I don't know if that in any way answers your question, but to me it's just about figure out what it is you're trying to do, and what your principles are, and make sure you abide by your own principles so that you don't become some sort of hypocrite in the process.
What have you personally learned from GamerGate?
Wow. Um, yeah, I suppose there's lots of different angles I could go there. I mean, I already said it changed the way that I felt about gaming press. It also changed the way I felt about game development in general. And so just personally going through that kind of Gamergate thing, followed by going through the Hogwarts Legacy experience that I had, which was, kind of an outgrowth of my videos on Gamergate, and having the press come after me years later for those videos, kind of made me realize that I was really Pollyanna and naive in the way that I had been viewing the games industry, for 25 years or whatever, uh, as something that people were doing out of love for the art. And I kind of had to realize, okay, there are a lot of people who are kind of on the periphery, who don't really even care that much about games themselves, but have other agendas, or maybe they're in it more for, financial reasons, or just for personal aggrandizement reasons or ideological reasons, and just kind of recognizing that, oh wow, not everybody who's involved in games um, shares that same passion and dedication to making good product and to having a good time with players. But to me, it was kind of like an awakening. Gamergate woke me up to the ideological underpinnings that were sweeping into our culture, and kind of made me feel differently about game development. It just made me think like, wow, um, there is a group of people out there who aren't really interested in games at all, but they see it as a platform to push agendas. Kind of
Probably
surprised me, I guess.
people, I guess,
Yeah.
on the left and the right. I mean, you talked about Milo and Breitbart.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I guess it was that loss of innocence. It went from being like it was all about games to now it's kind of about politics. Now it's got all that, and it made me feel a little bit sad because it felt like the golden age of gaming was in sunset, and now we were moving into some new phase, like Hollywood, kind of just like Hollywood. It felt like at a time they were probably about making great movies and stuff, and then it became about something else. Felt like that to me for games too.
Was Gamergate successful in your eyes?
I think it was. Yes, I think it forced a lot of the conversations to happen that needed to happen, and I see that in the Hogwarts Legacy boycott and the reaction that happened. That I think that the consumers said, "All right, press, we're not going to play your game here." Um, and I believe that Gamergate laid the foundations for consumers to be skeptical of their gaming press, and I'm not sure that it would have been as skeptical had Gamergate not come along.
What do you think of this interview project?
I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it's 9 years later, and it really takes me back, trying to put myself in the mindset of what was going on, and then just how things have changed over time. So I appreciate you contextualizing Gamergate, and it's weird to me that it still comes up. The Stacey Henley called me an alt-right Gamergate troll, which, kind of out of the blue. And I was like, wow, that has long legs on it. So I guess it is still culturally relevant 9 years later. It's crazy.
I guess that's what happens when you get a president elected.
Yeah.
Obviously
Gamergate
a
elected
joke.
Trump.
For context for the
Yeah.
book, that was obviously a joke.
Yeah, I got it.
So if anybody is reading this and they were pro Gamergate, what do you want to say to them
Reading it.
or listening?
Yeah.
What's
Well,
for the
if they
book?
were if they were pro Gamergate for the classical liberal ideals that we've discussed here, then I'd just say to them, I think you are on, in my opinion, the right side of that controversy, because I still agree with the classical liberal ideas of free speech and anti censorship and all the rest that I felt we were trying to stand up for on the ethical side, or at least that I felt the GamerGate guys who were saying that were standing up for it. Again, I didn't show up till 2016, so I didn't do anything except say, hey, I think these guys were right.
And I think, for me personally at least, and I think for most people, I think part of being a classical liberal too means that you're egalitarian to a degree, a high degree.
Yes.
Like that you believe
Yeah.
in treating people as individuals and not judging them based on their immutable characteristics.
Yes. One of my videos, the games lead the way video, and I put it at the end of most of them, I said that games are the most egalitarian form of entertainment ever created, and I made a big deal out of uh, character creation because you can be whatever you want to be in so many games that I'm like, man, this is just awesome, right? That I I think that character creation just defeats the whole games are trying to isolate or keep people out. No, character creation is about here. Come visit this gaming world and be whatever you want to be, please, right? And I love that about games.
Yeah, me too. And I think you can't be a liberal and be a classical liberal and be the things that they called us. And the vast
Right.
majority of us, I think, did have that classical liberal sentiment of egalitarianism. Of we not, you're a woman who wants to play games, fucking awesome. Let's play
Yeah,
games.
please join
Not
us. Get in
yeah.
here. Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people in GamerGate were women.
Yes. Yeah.
Like this, like this, it's complete bullshit that they were completely erased away by the media.
Yeah. That was yeah. I totally agree. Um, And yeah, that again, when had those interviews with Leanna Kersner, that really that helped me to open my mind a little bit because she and I disagree on lots of things politically, but we were able to have a conversation around our common love for games in those interviews we did back in 2016, and she helped me to think about the broader perspective of people across the political aisle, but finding a way to have some shared commonality around gaming.
Some of the people reading this book are anti-gamer. Sorry, let me rephrase this. Some of the people reading this book may hold a negative view of Gamergate. Do you have anything you want to say to these people?
Yeah, I think it's fine that they have that negative view, but I would encourage them to encourage or to look at all sides, just examine so that you have a well-rounded position. I don't mind that people have different positions. I just hope they are informed and so I would encourage them to think about some of those classical liberal values that those of us who felt sympathetic towards Gamergate and say, do those classical liberal values accord with what is the world you would want to live in, free speech, anti censorship, the ability for people to express themselves both artistically and verbally in a world where your viewpoints are respected and appreciated. And that's what I felt Gamergate was pushing back against because it felt like the gaming press was saying, no, only certain viewpoints are permitted now.
All right, Troy, you did it. 2 hours and 2 minutes.
All right. Well,
The last question. We got to do the last question, Troy. The last
you
question
bet.
is anything else you want to talk about regarding Gamergate?
Well, we covered a lot of ground. Trying to think if there was anything that I want to say. There's part of me that wants to leave it behind, but I see that it's still, culturally relevant. Um, yeah, I can't think of anything else other than if there's one thing that I want to say to gamers and players is that I would want people to try and mend fences between developers, players, and even with the press wherever possible, and recognize that at the end of the day, this video games is kind of a cooperative endeavor between players and developers, and unless you have players, you don't have a game, and so to me, having us kind of recognize that our art form requires us to some degree to cooperate with one another, players and developers, makes me want everybody to talk to each other more about what they expect both out of their games and out of their entertainment in this area. That's just uh, you know with my position of games being kind of the ultimate art form, that I think we're all going to be living in these virtual worlds that are going to be amazing to us in the next 2 decades. I think it's really important to us that we get those virtual worlds right, and that we talk about what sort of future we're headed into as our AI gets better and better, as we start making counterfeit humans or humans that are just like us. All of these classical liberal values, I think, are going to be very important, because we don't want to be in an authoritarian world where we're not allowed to explore all these options, and instead we're being told what we can and can't think or view or read. So to me, it is pretty important from that perspective.
Awesome. That was a good answer. You're actually the
It was,
first person to take me up on that. I didn't think I've asked every person that question, and everyone's like, "Nah, I'm out of here." But I usually say it less jokingly than I did now. Um, but I ask everybody that, and everybody, you're the first person to really do that. Wow.
yeah, I don't know. I guess I went looking for, like, what does Gamergate mean? And to me, it's, part of that cultural milieu of things changing over time, and classical liberal values are going to continue to be important to us, I think, going forward.
Well, and you talked
So,
about mending the bridges. No games journalists in there yet to my. Actually, I guess there is one games journalist in there. Actually, my Discord. But like this this since I've started this project back up, we've had a large number of like anti-GamerGate people
yeah,
come in and talk about it too with us. People we used to debate with, people, and of course, like we still like disagree on this thing. Not too many people are changing their minds on this, it seems, but we still disagree on the same things. But it's interesting, like to reconnect with people after all this time. It's like, you know what? We're all just human. That's all we all ever were, and like that's something that maybe could be an inspiration for like for helping to improve our discourse in society too. At the end of the day, you're all human. You all want, or most people, the vast majority of people, want to better the country, want to better the gaming industry, and we should work together towards those goals, even if they disagree on some things, and try to like collaborate and have those conversations, and possibly lead to more productive change than what we're seeing right now.
yes, I agree very much with everything you've said there, and I think, even if the conversations are a little bit rocky or rough with people you disagree with, at least you're talking, and that's much better than not talking. So I'm in favor of interacting with people with whom you disagree, provided they're doing so in good faith. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, thanks, Tachyon. It was, good to be here.
We can talk off air if you want for a minute, or if you gotta go, you gotta go. It's no either way.
Yeah, so I need to run pretty shortly, but yeah, let's talk off air just for a minute or two.
All right, give me just a second here. I'm gonna do a raid. I'm also a political live streamer,
Sweet.
so this project is taking up a lot of my time, which is great though, because it's amazing to go through this. But I'm really glad I did it. Actually, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea." Other people were encouraging it. Um, but I'm really glad that I decided to do the book. It's been. I'm sorry, I'm still on air. Hang on, 2 seconds.
Okay.
We're rating Erudite, so go ahead and say hi. Tachyon sent you.